We have not seen any delay from any of the scheduled approvals that we were expecting from the FDA. Speaking with John Reed, our top scientist at Johnson & Johnson yesterday, he said the scientific team there takes so much pride in their work that they're engaged, they're meeting as regularly scheduled. So until we see something different, I think people are going to gravitate to making sure we continue to elevate science.
3 seconds.
That was Johnson & Johnson CFO Joe Wolf, who joined us earlier on the program after Johnson & Johnson had posted results. The Trump administration, meanwhile, is investigating pharmaceutical imports, citing national security concerns. Joining us now, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. He's also a Pfizer and Illumina board member. And a lot of the things that you talk about here, Scott, I don't know if everyone knows this, but just about 70%, you note, of the key ingredients, the key chemical substances that are used, they all originate in China. That's troubling.
Yeah, that's right. I think when we look at the pharmaceuticals coming into the United States, first of all, we have to start the discussion with fully 50% of all the drugs consumed in the United States are manufactured here. There's about 300 registered facilities that manufacture drugs. Fully 10% of all the drugs that we consume are manufactured in Puerto Rico. For the other 50%, the vast majority of the economic value comes from drugs imported from Europe. So of the $235 billion trade deficit we have with Europe, about 40% of that is drugs. 50 billion alone comes from Ireland. So a lot of drugs, for branded drugs, have been moved into Ireland because of the tax advantages of manufacturing there. Those are the branded drugs. When the president talks about the national security concerns, by and large, I think what he's talking about isn't the fact that Lilly's manufacturing some of its weight loss drug in Ireland. He's talking about the fact that we rely on China for things like antibiotics and basic generic medicines that are important, that'll, in many cases, life-saving medicines. Heparin, hydrocortisone, 40% of the heparin used in the United States is made in China. Largely all the amoxicillin that's used in the United States is made in China as well. Those are generic drugs. And I fear that if the president places tariffs on those drugs, we're not just going to see prices increase, we're going to see companies stop manufacturing them because the margins of those drugs are very slim. And whereas the branded companies can shift manufacturing into the United States, they can absorb some of the increase on a temporary basis. They can advance manufacture some of their API and freeze it to buy themselves some time. There's things that they can do. They're not going to get out of the market of making a $100,000 a year drug. When it comes to the generic medicines, they don't have a lot of cushion. And I think a lot of these generic manufacturers are going to get out of these markets if tariffs are imposed on them. And then we're going to have drug shortages here. So the very problem they're trying to solve, which is the national security issue related to this 232 provision that they're trying to use, is the one that's going to be the least amenable to using this tool. And that's what I fear is going to happen. This was a discussion we had in the last Trump administration when the issue of tariffs on drugs first came up.
So there are things we could do. I don't know, do you hold off on the tariffs and start expediting all the things that you said to turn us into a domestic manufacturer of all this stuff? You do that first? You think it would be counterproductive to sort of force the issue by using tariffs?
Yeah, look, I think the president has an opportunity to strike a sort of grand bargain with the industry, particularly the branded industry. When you look at the branded companies that are manufacturing those high-margin products over in Ireland, they would be willing to bring a lot of that manufacturing back to the U.S. And in fact, you've seen Lilly and Novartis make announcements in recent weeks that they're bringing a substantial portion of that manufacturing back because, quite frankly, the tax advantage of manufacturing in Ireland isn't that substantial relative to bringing your manufacturing back to the U.S. and having more control over it. It's easier to hire labor here. The two biggest inputs in manufacturing are the labor costs and the energy costs. Energy is cheaper here. So the increased benefit they get from moving it to Ireland because of the tax treatment, it isn't fully offset by those other advantages, but it's an offset enough that they'd be willing to do it. But they need expedited approvals, not just from FDA, but environmental approvals as well. It takes 3 to 5 years to build a facility. They can retrofit some of their existing facilities in the meantime. But I think the president can get a deal with the branded drug industry to move a lot of that European-based manufacturing back to the U.S. With respect to the China-based manufacturing and the India-based manufacturing, so the key starting materials, 70% of all key starting materials that you mentioned are made in China. A lot of those are sent to India where they're finished into active pharmaceutical ingredient and then pressed into pills, and then those pills are imported into the U.S. That whole supply chain is going to be hard to move to the U.S. without some kind of effort on the administration to reduce regulatory barriers, maybe provide some targeted subsidies to move that back, because those are very low margin products. In many cases, the generic companies lose money on those drugs. They're just supplying them because their contracts, the hospitals that they contract with and others need them, and so they sell them at a loss in order to capture other business. That's not going to come back so easily, and it's certainly not going to come back from tariffs. So the very thing they're trying to do with this Section 232 provision, which is a national security provision, which is to try to address this supply chain that's moved to China. Most of that supply chain are these generic drugs, and they're just going to get out of the market, I fear, if the tariffs are imposed on them. So they need to bifurcate this and treat the European issue separate from the China issue. Both require a different solution. The European issue is largely a trade deficit issue. The China issue is a national security issue, but it's not going to be amenable to the same remedies that they're trying to impose on the European issue.
The one that you can use the national security, the one you can use it on, tariffs would be counterproductive.
Exactly, and also the one, well, the one that they would want to use it on, which is the China supply chain, the tariffs are very counterproductive. The one that they can use it on, where the market can absorb it, and I think the companies would be amenable to trying to work with the administration to bring manufacturing back, it probably doesn't apply. I mean, they may, they're going to get litigated.
It's a stretch to say that in Ireland that
making drugs in Ireland, exactly, is especially when we're talking about Greenland being a closer partner. Ireland's a pretty close partner, and I'm not too concerned about drugs being made there as a national security issue.
All right. Well, this is like a catch-22, and tariffs are, each time it's different, and it can either maybe be good, but could be counterproductive. Dr. Gottlieb, thanks. Good day, everyone. When he goes, it just starts talking. There's no O's.
It's amazing.
It's pretty smart. I know. Really. Pretty smart. Up next, check on